Are you out of your mind? That procedure could have killed him. The supervisor's words sliced through the intensive care unit like a scalpel. The nurse remained motionless, her fingers still quivering from performing CPR. The patient wasn't even under her care, not during her assigned hours, not her burden to shoulder. Yet in a room paralyzed by indecision, she alone took action. The following morning, a high-ranking military official entered the ICU carrying a mysterious black container and posed a question that rendered the entire medical facility speechless. Have you ever witnessed someone punished for doing what's right? Reply with one if you have. Welcome to Inspirational Chronicles, where we share narratives of courage and generosity. Let's discover what truly transpired. I'm Lauren Blake, a nursing professional at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital for the past decade. Most shifts blur together, routine checks, medication records, hush corridors. But occasionally, something happens that divides your life into before and after. That particular day started like any other. The intensive care wing was already understaffed. The emergency department had exceeded capacity due to a morning traffic collision on the highway, and an influenza outbreak had left our team stretched thin. Even the physicians appeared to have worked consecutive shifts. I had just finished checking on a post-operative patient when they brought in the new transfer, Mr. Henry Maddox, 79. He wore a weathered Navy veteran's cap. His gaze didn't nervously scan the room like most patients. Instead, his eyes held a remarkable serenity. Depth like someone who'd witnessed countless dawns over endless seas without ever wavering. His medical record indicated cardiac instability, multiple previous heart rhythm disturbances, and significant risk for sudden cardiac arrest. He'd been transferred from a Veterans Affairs facility for specialized heart monitoring, but what was more concerning than any notation in his file was how long we waited for a physician. 10 minutes after arrival, his heart stopped. I heard the continuous tone from across the ward, dropped my clipboard and sprinted. But when I reached room 314, Rachel Hayes was already there. Rachel wasn't even scheduled for Maddox's section of the ICU that day. She'd been redirected from post-surgical care. But when the alarm sounded, she didn't hesitate. The issue was, no doctor was available. They were all trapped 2 floors below, handling a critical patient in surgery. The emergency response team was delayed. All qualified cardiac nurses were occupied elsewhere. And in that terrible minute-long void of inaction, Rachel made a decision. She didn't just begin chest compressions. She initiated a pericardiocentesis, a high-risk procedure involving a needle and catheter inserted into the sac surrounding the heart to remove fluid. Sometimes it's the only intervention that can restore a failing rhythm, and Rachel wasn't certified to perform it. She was trained. She'd observed the procedure. She'd studied under emergency surgeons, but officially, no. Her credentials didn't authorize her to undertake such an invasive intervention independently, but she proceeded anyway. With only a junior medical student assisting, she sterilized the area, identified anatomical landmarks, and inserted the needle. The hallway grew so quiet that I swear we all heard the moment the catheter reached the proper depth. Moments later, Maddox's heartbeat returned. The cardiac team rushed in 30 seconds later, astonished to find the procedure already completed and Maddox alive. You'd expect celebration, embraces. Instead, enter Margaret Sinclair, the hospital's director of clinical oversight. And if there was one thing she valued above patient outcomes, it was following protocol. Her footsteps echoed like pistol shots down the corridor as she entered the room, lips already tightened in disapproval. "What have you done?" Rachel was still catching her breath. Her gloves were speckled with blood, hands trembling slightly. She looked up, composed but exhausted. "I performed a pericardiocentesis. He was dying. No one else was available." "You are not authorized for that procedure," Sinclair hissed. "That's a Category A violation. Waiting would have resulted in his death. Waiting would have protected this hospital from liability." And then, without even glancing at the patient now breathing again in the bed, Sinclair grabbed Rachel's identification badge, tore it from her uniform, and delivered 5 frigid words. "You are suspended." effective immediately. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic beeping of Maddox's recovering heart monitor and the soft gasp from the medical student who had just witnessed a hero being punished. After Rachel's suspension, the atmosphere in the ICU descended like a heavy curtain. She didn't weep. She didn't raise her voice or justify her actions. She simply removed her gloves, wiped perspiration from her face, and walked to the staff changing room. I followed her, not to offer grand speeches, just to provide presence. She sat silently for several minutes, staring at her hands as if they still held a life in balance. "He was slipping away, Lauren," she finally whispered. "I felt it. The fluid was compressing his heart. We had no time." "I know," I said softly. I saw the monitor. Her voice remained steady, but her posture had collapsed. "They're going to terminate my career over this." There was nothing reassuring I could offer. Her assessment wasn't wrong. By mid-morning, everyone had heard. Nursing staff fell silent when administrative personnel walked past. Several doctors privately expressed support, but none dared document it officially. It was the familiar narrative. Do what's morally right, violate procedures, and face consequences alone. At 10:15 a.m., an urgent review was scheduled. Hospital administration claimed it was to evaluate protocol violations and patient safety risks. That's bureaucratic language for building a case against her. Margaret Sinclair led the panel. Predictably, I observed from just outside the glass-enclosed conference room as Rachel took her seat in isolation. No union representative, no senior staff supporting her, just 5 faces across the table. Human resources, legal counsel, executive director, compliance officer, and Sinclair, arms folded like a prosecuting attorney. "She's going to lose her job," Jules murmured beside me. "They've predetermined the outcome." I remained silent because at that moment Rachel's phone vibrated on the bench next to me. She'd left it in her locker. I picked it up instinctively, then froze. The screen displayed one unread message from DM. "What she did saved a hero. I'll arrive before noon." I stared at the message. Jules read over my shoulder. "Wait, DM? No way." "Who?" I asked. "Daniel Maddox, Henry's younger brother, former general. He's a military legend." A shiver ran through me. "How would he know?" Jules slowly shook her head. "Doesn't matter how he knows. This situation is about to become very public." I looked back toward the meeting room. Inside, Rachel was being systematically dismantled. They displayed printouts of hospital regulations, cited licensing statutes, replayed security footage of her performing the pericardiocentesis without authorization. But they didn't show the heart monitor stabilizing. They didn't show the moment Maddox resumed breathing. They didn't show the life she restored. "She acted recklessly," Sinclair declared. "This clearly warrants license revocation." Rachel didn't flinch. "I made a decision to save a patient when no alternatives existed." "There's an established chain of command." The compliance officer snapped. "There was no one to command," she finally erupted, her voice cracking through the air like lightning. Everyone became motionless. "I called for assistance," she continued, fists clenched. "No one responded. If you want to assign blame, direct it at the system that abandoned us in that room. But don't pretend I didn't save his life." Outside, a nurse accidentally dropped her clipboard in the hallway. The sound reverberated all the way to the administrative section, and in that pause, through the glass entrance doors, I saw him. A tall figure, black overcoat, silver hair, erect posture like a military officer. He moved with the kind of confidence you don't develop. You earn through experience. Under one arm, he carried a polished wooden container. In his other hand, a sealed envelope bearing a Department of Defense emblem. He paused at the reception desk. The receptionist's expression transformed instantly. She stood so quickly she nearly overturned her chair. She reached for the telephone and everything shifted. Not in the conference room, not through legal documents, but in the gradual realization that someone had just entered this hospital who hadn't come to navigate bureaucracy. He arrived with purpose, and Rachel Hayes was about to discover She wasn't standing alone after all. It was 11:58 a.m. I recall the precise time because the second hand on the wall clock seemed suspended just before noon, as if time itself held its breath in anticipation. The man in the black coat didn't wait for the authorization. He strode directly past reception, past visitors, past astonished medical interns. Each footstep resonated through the marble corridor, steady as a heartbeat. Then he turned into the administrative wing. I remained outside the meeting room when I spotted him. His presence was magnetic, drawing the atmosphere tightly around him. His military decorations gleamed beneath the hospital lighting. But what was most striking was the composure in his eyes, the kind of tranquility that comes from standing on battlefields and making decisions others fear to make. He opened the door without knocking, without requesting permission, and uttered 7 words that rendered the entire room silent. "I'm here regarding Nurse Rachel Hayes." Immediately the panel froze. Margaret Sinclair rose partially from her chair, caught between indignation and bewilderment. "Excuse me, this is a private—" "I'm Colonel Daniel Maddox," he stated, placing the envelope on the table. "And I strongly suggest you allow me to speak." No one dared interrupt him again. Rachel turned slowly in her seat. Her complexion paled. She recognized the name. Everyone did. Colonel Maddox opened the wooden box he'd carried and turned it toward the table. Inside, cushioned in velvet, was a Purple Heart medal. Below it, a small black and white photograph showing a young soldier carrying another across a smoke-filled battlefield. "That's Henry," he said quietly. "Your patient." The room grew completely still. "My brother has 3 decades of military service, 3 combat deployments, wounds that still haunt his sleep. And today he's alive because a nurse disregarded protocol and remembered her humanity." He looked directly at Sinclair. "I've examined the security footage. I observed the hesitation from your personnel. I watched the clocks. I witnessed the monitors flatline, and I saw one individual respond." He addressed the hospital director now, voice controlled yet penetrating. "You claim she exceeded her scope of practice. I say she upheld the fundamental essence of medical ethics." Sinclair attempted to speak, but the colonel raised his hand. "In military service, we train soldiers to act when orders are absent. It's called initiative. We honor it, not condemn it." Then he revealed a second document, signed, sealed, and official. "This is a petition endorsed by military leadership and members of the Maddox family. If disciplinary proceedings continue against Nurse Hayes, we will initiate a public investigation into Oak Ridge's emergency staffing inadequacies and systemic delays." The director's face blanched. Colonel Maddox inhaled deeply, then delivered one final statement that would remain with everyone present. "Sometimes the most courageous act a soldier witnesses is someone like her standing alone." Silence enveloped the room. Then gradually the director rose. Her gaze met Rachel's. "You preserved his life," she acknowledged softly, "and apparently reminded us all what this institution is meant to represent." She turned toward Sinclair. "Her suspension is terminated, effective immediately." Margaret remained motionless. Her jaw tightened, her hands clasped so firmly her knuckles whitened, but she remained silent. Colonel Maddox stepped forward and extended his hand toward Rachel. She stood uncertainly, unsure if she should accept the gesture. But he gently took her hand and placed something in her palm. A medical insignia pin, the kind worn by battlefield medics. "You may not wear a uniform," he said, "but make no mistake. What you did yesterday was combat medicine in its purest form." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. And for the first time that day, she smiled. Not from relief, but from finally being truly recognized. 3 days later, the atmosphere in the ICU felt transformed. Rachel had returned to duty that morning. No formal announcements, no speeches, just a subtle acknowledgement from the charge nurse and the familiar sound of her ID badge sliding through the security reader. She entered as if nothing had changed, though everyone understood everything had. This time, no one avoided meeting her gaze. And when she passed Margaret Sinclair in the corridor, even Margaret didn't elevate her chin as she typically did. She simply stepped aside. But the moment that remained most vivid for me occurred in room 314. Rachel entered cautiously, uncertain if Henry Maddox would even recall her. He was sitting upright now, supported by pillows, EV still connected, but color restored to his face. His eyes were alert, focused. He looked at her and smiled. "You're the one," he whispered, "the one who didn't wait." Rachel struggled for words. She simply returned his smile and gently adjusted his monitor. "My brother explained everything," Henry said, voice rough with age. "You did what regulations forbade, and because of that, I'm here." Rachel nodded. "I did what was necessary." "No," he stated firmly. "You did what was right. That's not always identical." Then slowly the elderly veteran extended his hand. "I carried wounded men from helicopters in Vietnam," he said, tears forming. "Never imagined someday someone would fight for me." Rachel gently clasped his hand. "That's how it works," she whispered. "We take turns caring for each other." Later that day, the hospital assembled its entire nursing staff for the evening shift transition. Sinclair stood at the nursing station, surprisingly composed, though her eyes revealed a burden previously concealed. She cleared her throat. "I want to address the events from earlier this week," she began. "Rachel Hayes saved a man's life. I responded by suspending her for it." She paused. "I was wrong." The words echoed through the hushed space. "I allowed procedures to supersede judgment, and I forgot what this institution exists to protect. Because of Nurse Hayes, we're modifying our emergency response policy, effective immediately. From now on, any trained nurse may initiate life-saving intervention under what we're designating the Hayes Protocol." Silence followed. Then gradually one nurse began applauding. Another joined, and within moments the entire assembly rose in ovation. Even several physicians participated. Rachel blushed, but stood quietly, eyes downcast. That evening she was summoned to the director's office one final time. Colonel Maddox was already present, seated alongside the hospital board. This time no one appeared confrontational. No one seemed ashamed. They looked grateful. The director handed Rachel a folder. "We'd like you to lead a new initiative to restructure our emergency response training and teach nurses when to trust their instincts." Rachel opened the folder slowly. Inside was a letter of commendation and a framed copy of the new protocol bearing her name. As she exited the room, I watched her pause by the ICU window, where Henry sat with his brother beside him, sharing laughter over some distant memory. She didn't speak, but I understood her thoughts. Some battles require no weapons. They simply need someone courageous enough to act before permission arrives, and someone powerful enough to ensure no one forgets why. In our darkest hours, compassion always finds a path forward, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps seeks recognition. Some simply need to know that today, someone isn't suffering, and sometimes that alone transforms a life completely. You may forget this story, but if no one shares it, history remains forever silent. Subscribe to Inspirational Chronicles, where justice is celebrated, kindness is preserved, and no act of quiet heroism ever fades away.